These ideas of consumers and producer surplus that we have learned in the last couple of videos, they have very far-reaching implications as far as economic theory is concerned. Because economic theory, it sort of measures the efficiency of a free market in terms of consumers and producer surplus. What do I mean by that? Now, by very definition, in a free market, there are only two economic agents that are involved: the consumers who bring in the demand and the producers who bring in the supply. So any benefit that is possible to be earned by selling and buying in a free market is obviously going to go either to the consumer or to the producer. So that tells us that the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus, that is, if you add all of this area, the consumer surplus, the benefit to the consumer, with all of this area or producer surplus, the benefit to the producer, then what you get is the total benefit to the society from this market of computer. If the quantity Q star, which we assumed is 100, is produced and sold at a price P star of 50. Now, another word that is commonly used, instead of saying total benefit to the society, we also mostly use the word total welfare to the society. Now, what does consumer and producer surplus, all of this area, tell us about the efficiency of this particular free market of computers? Of course, whatever we conclude about this particular market applies equally to markets of all the other products. So that is the usual way in microeconomics. We focus and zoom in on one particular good, and all the conclusions then are equally applicable. Anyhow, consumers producer surplus. Now, what they can tell us about efficiency is that, look, if free markets and the equilibrium quantity that they tell you, if that quantity is in fact the best for the society, if in fact the free market is giving you the best allocation of resources by telling you exactly the right, the best, the optimal quantity of every product, in this case the computers that should be produced and sold, then at this equilibrium quantity Q star, the sum of consumers and producer surplus, the total welfare to the society, it should be maximized. Because that sort of proves that, look, the free market equilibrium quantity Q star, this is where the sum of consumer producer surplus, the total welfare, if it's maximized, then yes, markets are the most efficient. You cannot do better than what the market is telling you to do. But we can easily check that, because you see, there are only a couple of ways of going against this market. We can either decide, the government can interfere, and it can either decide to order the market to produce more than Q star, allocate more resources towards this product, or it can order to produce less than Q star and allocate fewer resources to computer. Now, will that lead to a better allocation of resources? Well, let's check, because you see, if the allocation of resources is improved by either producing more or less computers, then the sum of consumers and producer surplus, the total benefit, the total welfare to the society, that should also increase. But does it increase? Let's pick up a quantity above Q star or to the right of Q star. That means if we decide to produce more than 100 units, allocate more resources, then will the consumer benefit? Now, the maximum price that a consumer would be willing to pay for this unit is the usual height till the demand curve. But what is the price that he will actually have to pay? Again, it will be the height till the price line. We don't have a price line here because so far we assumed we'll only produce Q star, so we can simply extend it to the right. So the price that some consumer will have to actually pay to get this Q first computer is this height till the price line. Whereas the maximum he was willing to pay is the height of this line only till this point. So he actually ends up paying more than the maximum he would have been willing to pay. So if anything, if he decides to buy this product or this quantity of computer, he will earn a negative consumer surplus. So not good for the consumer. If you produce more than Q star, the total consumer surplus, it will decrease. You will still earn this much of consumer surplus on the first Q star units, but the next units beyond Q star, that will eat up your consumer surplus, negative consumer surplus. What about the producers? Now, if the producer, he produces and sells this quantity Q1, then the minimum price that he requires to be paid to produce Q first computer is this I till the supply curve, whereas the price that he will actually receive will be less than this minimum. So the producer will also be here. The producer surplus will also be taken away, eaten up. The producers, they will still earn this producer surplus on all these first Q star units, but anything more than that they produce will in fact reduce their total producer surplus. So producing more than Q star, allocating more resources than what the free market is telling you, that if anything, that reduces the total welfare. So markets are still the most efficient. This Q star wins. What about producing anything less than Q star? Let's assume we only produce a total of these Q1 units. So we produce all of these units, but only up till Q1, and we don't produce the other units, all of these crossed out units till Q star. Now this is an easy one to figure out. Why? Because if you stop at this Q1 over here, you can just draw an imaginary line here. It doesn't mean anything. Now if you stop here, what we are saying here is that you are not producing anything beyond Q1. So anything to the right of Q1, this market is gone. The product is not being produced, it's not being sold, so there is no way anybody, either the producer or consumer, can benefit from it. So all of this consumer and producer surplus to the right of this imaginary line implies to the right of this quantity Q1, it will all be lost to the society, because the market will shrink. If you don't produce these units, you don't consume these units, there is no way anybody can get this surplus that was potentially there for somebody to enjoy, for some consumer or producer to enjoy. So you see, again, producing less than the free market's equilibrium quantity Q star again leads to a reduction in the total welfare, measured as the sum of consumers and producer surplus. So that tells us, or that leaves us, I should say, with this exact quantity Q star as in fact being exactly the quantity at which the sum of consumers and producer surplus, and therefore the total welfare of the society, is maximized. And therefore we have sort of proven that the free market, it is in fact the best way of allocating resources and deciding how much of each product to produce. Now, a word of caution and a sort of a foreword for what we have to do in the next few sections. What we have just said, that free markets are the most efficient. They tell you exactly the best quantity Q star at which consumers and producer surplus is maximized. That is true. That is true 99% of the times. And when this is true, we say the markets have succeeded. But what is more important is to remember that in 1% of the rare cases, the markets, they also fail. And market failure we will study in detail in the last section. But remember, market failure simply means when the quantity Q star that the free market is telling you to produce, when it turns out not to be the quantity at which the sum of consumers and producer surplus is maximized. That is when you say that, look, market is either overproducing and over allocating resources, or underproducing this product and under allocating these resources to this product. The market is failing to allocate just the exactly right amount of resources to produce the right Q star this time. Right in the sense that it's not maximizing the sum of consumers and producer surplus. Now, the good news for economic theory is that these cases of market failure, they are very, very rare, and they are very, very predictable. So we can already predict, we can learn when the market will fail, and therefore we can do something about it. Now, the bad news for somebody preparing for your A-level exam at the very last moment is that we need to study all of these rare cases of market failure. We do that at the very end of this particular course. But what we will do next is we will study the different forms of or different ways in which the government interferes in this free market. We'll talk about taxes, we will talk about subsidies, we'll talk about price controls. And there are all different ways in which the government interferes in this very efficient free market, which we are saying succeeds 99% of the times. So without knowing any details about this government intervention, you should already know that, look, if 99% of the times this free market succeeds and tells you the exact right quantity Q star, the most efficient quantity, the quantity at which the welfare is maximized, then if the government interferes in this free market, disturbs this equilibrium, moves it to the left or the right, up or down, that is, in price increases, decreases, we don't care. As long as government interference moves the equilibrium away from the free markets, it will be definitely creating some inefficiency. So government interference, it may have tons of good reasons to interfere, but as far as this, in the strictest sense, and the welfare and economic efficiency is concerned, in the most theoretical sense, we can already predict that government interference, it will worsen the welfare of the society or the economy. It will lower the total welfare. The only time when economists and the governments, they agree on government interference and they agree that, look, okay, government should interfere, is when the markets, they fail to produce the exact right quantity. That is where the economists also agree that, look, interfere, disturb the market equilibrium and try to move it to the optimal quantity. So this small discussion over here at the end is basically the overview of the details that we are going to cover in the second half of this course.